In this video, I'm going to be showing or demonstrating how to set up the yeast respiration activity, part one of the yeast respiration activity. So right now you see the materials that you're going to need. Now the handout that you'll access, or you have accessed, there's maybe some things that aren't mentioned there. If you have a funnel, that would be handy for you. But if you don't have a funnel, a little piece of aluminum foil would work really well. And again, I'll talk about when you might need to use those alternatives if you don't have a funnel. Thermometer's handy. We wouldn't necessarily have to have one. You're going to be using hot tap water, so you want to let that tap water run so it's at the hottest point, and that should be around that 115 degrees Fahrenheit, or 45 degrees Celsius, which is just what you need to activate the yeast. I'm showing a couple different types of yeast here. I'm going to be using just the regular Flesherman's active yeast. There also is some rapid yeast there, but I'm going to use the regular. You'll have in your packet, you would have gotten the yeast, 3 packs of yeast, a couple balloons, and then the rest of this you'll need to supply. I'm just using a 20-ounce pop bottle, but you can also use like the 17.9-ounce plastic pop bottle. Just remove the label. Scissors. You'll need a 1/4 of a cup measuring cup. You'll need a teaspoon measuring spoon. You'll need some sugar, just some table sugar, and then you'll be using your hot water. You need some string or yarn or ribbon to measure the circumference of your balloon, and you'll need a ruler to measure that, measure the length of your string, which equals the circumference of the balloon. All right, so to start this out, I'm going to move some stuff out of the way here. So in part one, what we're going to do is add a packet of yeast. This is the 4-ounce packet, which is around 7 grams of yeast. We're going to add a teaspoon of sugar, which is just a little over 5 grams of sugar. We're going to add a 1/2 cup or 1/4 cup of hot water to the yeast and sugar, and get the yeast activated. The hot water is going to be about 60 milliliters of hot water. And then this is what we're going to consider our normal setup and normal activation of yeast. And then we're going to allow it to inflate a balloon. That'll run for 15 minutes, inflate a balloon, and then we're going to measure the volume of air in the balloon by measuring the circumference around the widest part of the balloon. And then in your handout, then there's a website that'll take you to, or there's a link to a website that you'll use to calculate the volume of air in the balloon. And then that's what we're going to consider our normal rate of CO2 production by yeast when we activate it using the 5 grams of sugar. Okay, so first thing it says to do is to add our yeast. So we're going to use the scissors here, cut a nice edge off the packet, and then I'm going to add that to the yeast to the bottle, and try to shouldn't need a funnel for this. Should just go in. There we go, nicely. Spill a little bit there, but we've got all of it in, except for a few little grains a few more grains that are spilling. If you could, I could have poured it on to my paper here, and which I would not have made such a mess probably. And then just clean the paper, and then just let it slide in. So I am going to do that with the sugar. So I'm going to get a level teaspoon of sugar here, and just going to pour that onto my paper. Again, just a piece of printer paper or notebook paper or the aluminum foil. Just take a piece of aluminum foil, would work really well. And just use that as my funnel here. Slide the teaspoon of sugar in. Okay, so now I'm ready to get my hot water. And again, I didn't mention this, but don't get your hot water till you're at this point. You want your hot water to be as hot as possible without, you don't want it to cool before you use it. So now I'm going to go get some hot water. There's no hot water at this sink, so I got to go here. So I filled this cup, not completely full, but fuller than I'm probably going to need it. So again, to make sure you're working close to the sink here. Excuse me. So next thing I want to do is add 1/4 cup of the hot water. And so if you don't have a funnel, again, the aluminum foil funnel would work. So I'm going to get this hot water into the yeast and sugar. And now I want to gently swirl this to get the sugar dissolved. Of course, the yeast is not going to dissolve, it's just going to mix in the water here. But I want to make sure I get my sugar dissolved into the hot water. Get it up off the bottom here. If you're not sure about your water temperature, if you have a thermometer that can go measure 115 Fahrenheit, or 100 to 115, 100 to 120, you can use that to double check it. And this one's going to be right at 45, a little over 45, 46, 47 degrees Celsius, which is just will be perfect. So now I'm going to put the hot water in the styrofoam cup is my hot water bath. So I'm going to have to go over to the sink here, which you might not be able to see that because I've got more water than I need. So I'm going to push the bottle down into the styrofoam cup so that it wedges, pour a little more water out. I want it to wedge, and don't push too hard so you break open the cup, but you want it to wedge into the styrofoam cup so that it holds the bottle down so that most of it's covered with water. So so now you're ready to put your balloon on, and I think this is a 9-inch, this is a 10-inch. One thing, I can't remember if I put that in the instructions in the lab, but make sure you inflate the balloon to stretch it out. So just again, get it inflated, and then let it deflate, and again push the air out just to stretch that balloon out. Then you're going to put the balloon over the mouth of your bottle. Okay, let's get back up here. If there's a lot of air in the balloon, just pinch and pull the edge of the balloon, you can let the air out. And now start your timer. And I've got my cell phone here. I'm going to start my cell phone timer. And you're going to time and let the yeast respire for 15 minutes. Okay, for 15 minutes. Again, as the yeast does its thing, feeds on the sugar, does cellular respiration, it's going to produce CO2, which is going to inflate the balloon. Okay, so at the end of 15 minutes, and I've started one here earlier, and let me grab that. So this one's been going, I guess I don't know how long this one's been going. It's been going for a little while. But at the end of 15 minutes, so let's say it's been 15 minutes, and you're then going to measure the circumference of the balloon. We're going to assume that this balloon is a sphere. So I'm going to take my string here, and I'm going to go around the widest part of the balloon. Okay, and then I'm going to measure the circumference here. You can measure it in centimeters, or if you can, measure it in centimeters. So this is 18 centimeters. I believe the website you can adjust for whatever, if it's centimeters or inches. But try to do it in centimeters. Most rulers you probably have it in centimeters. And so that's 18. And so then I would go to the website, and there's in the handout, I have my handout handy. There's a link to a website where you'll plug in the circumference, and then make sure that you have the circumference read out in, I have it in here. You want the circumference, make sure whatever units it's in, so if it's in centimeters, and then you want your volume to be in cubic centimeters. So make sure you adjust that volume calculation in the cubic centimeters. Then there's a data table. You'll plug that information, the circumference of the balloon, the volume of gas that was produced in 15 minutes, and then you will calculate the rate per minute. And to do that, you'll divide the volume of gas that was produced by 15, and that'll give you a production rate per minute. Okay, so now I have a problem here. If it starts doing that, make sure you get that balloon well over the mouth of the tube. So it looks like I have a hole in there. But again, make sure that you get that balloon. See, it's starting to leak there a little bit. So on this one, I got it well down over the mouth. So this one I should have gotten a little farther over the mouth of the plastic bottle, looks like. Okay, I'm going to have to set this in here before it gets yeast all over. Now, so that rate of gas production, CO2 production, in cubic centimeters per minute will be what we'll consider to be the normal rate of CO2 production for the yeast I was using. Okay, or it'll be the yeast that you're using. Then on part 2 of the experiment, you're going to be asked to change one of the factors from the normal setup, and then design the experiment to test what effect changing that factor has on the rate of gas production. So things you could do, you could add, like add more yeast, add less yeast. If you add less yeast, you'll have to do it by maybe tablespoon, because this is like 2.5 tablespoons. I think I have that written in here. That 4 ounces, 2.25 tablespoons. You could double the yeast. You could change the type of sugar source, the amount of sugar, or type of sugar. Now again, remember, only change one variable. So don't do this. Don't change. Well, I'm going to use honey, and I'm going to use double the amount of honey. Well, that's changing 2 factors. If you're going to use honey, then you only want to use 1 tablespoon of honey instead of 1 tablespoon of sugar. You could change the temperature of the water. If you want to get it, use hotter water, you'd have to heat it up and then make sure you measure what the temperature of water is that you use. Or you could cool it down and again need to measure the temperature of the water that you use. So again, in part 2, you will you'll use the 4 P's of problem solving that you'll see in the handout, and you'll design the experiment, and you'll use the same procedure, except you'll change that variable. So let's say if I was going to use double the yeast, then where it says add 4 ounces of yeast, I would say I'm adding 8 ounces of yeast. Or if I was changing the amount of sugar or the type of sugar, so in the first procedure in part 1, then I would change whatever it says for sugar to what I'm going to do. And then you'll run that experiment and determine, just like you see here, then determine the rate of CO2 production in cubic centimeters per minute, and then compare that to part 1's rate, and answer questions based on that. So, okay, so this has been going about 6 minutes here, and got a nice little balloon going there. This one's been going longer, but I got a little leak. It's like a yeast leaking. So be next to a sink. You may need the sink to help you out there a little bit. Again, if you have any questions, email me or text me, call me, let me know. Okay. All right. Good luck.